In September 2015, 21-year-old Ryan Zimmerman went missing in Ohio. He had recently moved to Columbus, Ohio, and was in contact with friends and acquaintances through social media and online networks. Zimmerman was last seen leaving his residence, and after he failed to make contact with family and friends, he was reported missing. Authorities initially treated his disappearance as a missing person case. Police began their investigation by speaking with friends, neighbors, and individuals who had been in contact with Zimmerman in the days prior to his disappearance. His family provided background information, including details of his daily routines, personal habits, and recent acquaintances. Law enforcement documented his personal items, clothing, and possessions, and attempted to trace his last known activities. Within a few weeks, Zimmerman's absence raised concern that he might be in danger. Investigators examined online communications, social media activity, and any digital footprints that could indicate his whereabouts. During this time, there was no confirmed evidence of foul play, and his case remained open while officers continued to gather information from people in his social circle. In early 2016, human remains were discovered near a wooded area in Columbus, Ohio, in proximity to a creek. The remains were partially concealed in vegetation, and initial forensic assessment indicated that the body had been dismembered. The condition of the remains suggested that death was not accidental, and the case was classified as a homicide investigation. Law enforcement secured the scene, collected evidence, and transported the remains to the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation for examination. Investigators faced challenges in identifying the remains due to the condition of the body. Traditional methods such as dental comparisons and fingerprinting were limited because of dismemberment and the decomposition of tissue. Forensic teams conducted DNA testing and created a profile to compare against missing person databases. Family members were contacted to provide reference DNA samples, which would later confirm the identity of the remains as Ryan Zimmerman. The investigation focused on identifying potential suspects who had contact with Zimmerman in the weeks before his disappearance. Police reviewed interviews with friends, online contacts, and individuals who had associations with Zimmerman, including people he met after relocating to Columbus. The review included examination of cell phone records, social media interactions, and other communication channels. Investigators documented alibis and cross-checked locations during the relevant period. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement determined that the homicide was planned and involved more than one person. Evidence collected at the scene and during follow-up inquiries indicated that Zimmerman's death had been carried out deliberately. Investigators documented physical evidence, including items used in the commission of the crime, and analyzed forensic traces that connected potential suspects to the scene. Over the next several years, the case remained unresolved, classified as a cold case while detectives periodically reviewed the collected evidence. Advances in investigative methods and forensic technology, including DNA testing and digital forensics, allowed authorities to continue analyzing materials that had been collected in 2015 and 2016. In 2021, investigators identified Sarah Buzzard as a suspect in the murder of Ryan Zimmerman. Buzzard had connections to Zimmerman through personal relationships and social circles in Columbus. Further investigation revealed that she had an accomplice, Nyra Jenna Whitaker, who was involved in planning and executing aspects of the crime. Law enforcement established that Zimmerman had been murdered and his body dismembered to conceal the crime. Following interviews and review of evidence, authorities obtained warrants and prepared for arrest. When officers attempted to apprehend Nyra Whitaker, she died by suicide. Sarah Buzzard was subsequently arrested and charged with murder and related offenses. The investigation included documenting the events leading to Zimmerman's death, reconstructing timelines, and establishing the involvement of each suspect. The prosecution in the case relied on evidence collected from the scene, digital communications, and forensic analysis, which demonstrated that Zimmerman's murder was intentional and premeditated. Witness statements, corroborating information from acquaintances, and physical evidence were used to establish the sequence of events. The investigation confirmed that Zimmerman's death occurred shortly after his last known contact with Buzzard and Whitaker. Court proceedings took place after the arrest of Sarah Buzzard. She was tried for the murder of Ryan Zimmerman. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, documentation of planning, and accounts from individuals familiar with the events. Defense arguments were addressed, and the court examined the admissibility of the forensic findings, including DNA results, physical evidence, and communications between Zimmerman and the suspects. In 2022, Sarah Buzzard was convicted and sentenced to 30 years to life in prison for her role in the murder of Ryan Zimmerman. The sentencing reflected the severity of the crime, the premeditated nature of the act, and the deliberate steps taken to conceal the homicide. Authorities confirmed that Zimmerman's murder was fully resolved with the conviction of Buzzard, and the case transitioned from an active cold case to a closed homicide case. The death of Nyra Whitaker by suicide meant that she could not face prosecution, and law enforcement documented her involvement as part of the investigation. Investigators used evidence collected prior to her death to establish her role as an accomplice. Her death also closed the possibility of criminal proceedings against her, while confirming her participation in the planning and execution of the crime.
The identification of Zimmerman's remains, combined with the arrest and conviction of the responsible parties, provided closure to his family and resolved a case that had remained cold for nearly 6 years. Law enforcement emphasized the importance of thorough documentation, preservation of evidence, and continued review of cold cases to achieve resolution even years after the initial crime. Ryan Zimmerman's family was notified of the outcome and the sentencing of Sarah Buzzard. They expressed relief that the perpetrators had been identified and that the details of Zimmerman's murder had been legally adjudicated. Authorities noted that the case highlighted the role of forensic science, investigative persistence, and cross-agency cooperation in solving complex homicide cases. The Ryan Zimmerman case illustrates several investigative principles. Immediate collection of evidence, careful documentation, and ongoing case review were essential to eventually identifying the perpetrators. Modern forensic techniques, including DNA analysis and digital forensic review, allowed investigators to confirm connections that were not apparent at the time of Zimmerman's disappearance. The case also underscores the potential for cold cases to be resolved even after years of inactivity. Zimmerman's disappearance initially appeared to be a missing person case, but forensic analysis and subsequent investigation confirmed homicide and led to the prosecution of those responsible. The timeline from disappearance in 2015 to resolution in 2021-2022 demonstrates the importance of persistence and advances in investigative technology. Authorities have indicated that lessons from the Zimmerman case are applied to other unresolved cases. The preservation of physical and digital evidence ensures that future investigative methods can be applied. Additionally, collaboration among law enforcement agencies, forensic experts, and legal authorities contributed to the successful resolution of this case. Ryan Zimmerman's murder and the subsequent investigation are now fully documented in court records, law enforcement files, and forensic reports. The resolution of the case provides a definitive record of events, confirming both the circumstances of his death and the identity of the perpetrator. The case remains a reference point for solved cold cases in Ohio and nationally. The investigation, arrest, prosecution, and sentencing demonstrate a complete life cycle of a criminal investigation. From initial missing person reporting through forensic examination, identification of the victim, determination of homicide, identification of suspects, and finally conviction, all aspects were addressed in accordance with legal and investigative standards. The case has also been cited in discussions about cold case investigations and the application of modern investigative techniques to solve crimes that were unresolved for multiple years. The resolution has reinforced the principle that persistence, evidence preservation, and coordinated investigation can yield results even in complex homicide cases. With the conviction of Sarah Buzzard and the documentation of Naira Whitaker's involvement, law enforcement considers the Ryan Zimmerman case closed. The identification of the victim, the establishment of culpability, and the sentencing provide closure to the victim's family and demonstrate the effectiveness of sustained investigative work combined with modern forensic methods.
In February 1954, Wilford Eugene Morton was a 27-year-old husband and father of 4 young children living in West Virginia. Morton's family lived in a rural mountain community where he had worked in the coal mines before transitioning to long-distance trucking. In early 1954, Morton told his wife, Opal, and their children that he was leaving to take a job driving a truck that delivered Studebaker automobiles. The job required him to travel long distances, including routes through the Carolinas and other states. He was described by family members as a hard-working provider. On the morning Wilford Morton left with his belongings, he said goodbye to his wife and children. His oldest daughter was only 7 years old at the time. After waving goodbye and departing from the family home, Morton was never seen again by his family. They expected him to travel and return on the established schedule, but contact was never re-established. Over the following days, family members attempted to reach him by phone and by contacting his employer, but they were unsuccessful. The trucking company informed Morton's wife that their records indicated he had not worked for them for 4 years. In the weeks after his departure, the family grew increasingly concerned. Opal Morton tried repeatedly to find information about her husband's whereabouts. She contacted relatives, friends, and anyone she could think of who might have had contact with him. She also followed up with the trucking company seeking clarification, but each inquiry failed to provide answers. As months passed with no contact or confirmed sightings, the family faced uncertainty and distress. During the period immediately following his disappearance, there were no confirmed reports of Wilford Morton's location. Family members recalled that Opal once received a letter purportedly from her husband requesting a photograph of their daughter. The letter, however, was inconclusive. Opal chose not to act on it due to uncertainty about its authenticity. There were no return addresses that could be verified, and the content did not provide positive confirmation that he was still alive. By 1955 and 1956, Morton's disappearance became the subject of both family concern and sporadic unofficial inquiry. It was not reported at the time that law enforcement formally declared his case a homicide. Rather, he was initially classified as a missing person. The absence of credible leads, eyewitness accounts, or evidence made investigating the case difficult for his family and for any authorities who may have assisted. The unknown circumstances surrounding his disappearance left open multiple possibilities, including voluntary abandonment, accidental death while traveling, or becoming a victim of crime. Decades passed without resolution. His children grew up without knowing the fate of their father, and his wife continued to live with unanswered questions. The lack of closure hindered the family's ability to move forward, and his disappearance remained a lingering mystery across generations. In the mid-2010s and early 2020s, interest in the case resurfaced primarily through family members seeking answers long after the disappearance. In 2021, Wilford Morton's great-granddaughter, Kaylee Bruce, took an active role in researching the case. She reached out to a YouTuber and missing persons researcher, Sean McCracken, who operated a channel focusing on mysteries and unsolved disappearances. McCracken produced a video detailing Morton's disappearance, seeking to engage a wider audience and solicit information from individuals who might have historical records or insights. Within minutes of the video being published, a viewer using the name Edward commented that a man named Wilford E. Morton was reported to have died in a car crash in 1956 in Messina, New York. The comment prompted renewed research into historical newspaper archives and public records. The family and McCracken located an old newspaper article describing a fatal automobile accident involving a Wilford E. Morton, identified as being from Norfolk, near Messina, New York, who had died when his vehicle left a curve of the road. A photograph accompanying the article appeared to show the car involved in the collision. Further investigation led to identifying a local funeral home that managed the burial. The funeral home provided a death certificate for an individual whose name was recorded as Wilfred Morton, with a slightly incorrect date of birth. Despite the misspelling, his social security number on the certificate matched the number known to belong to Wilford Eugene Morton. This confirmation established that the individual who died in the 1956 accident was indeed the same Wilford Morton who had disappeared in 1954. The discovery of the death certificate and obituary provided long-awaited closure to the family after nearly 7 decades. Morton's remains were interred in a cemetery in New York, and the funeral home records confirmed his burial location. His disappearance, once a decades-old mystery, was effectively resolved through historical research, public records, and the involvement of individuals outside traditional law enforcement channels. The circumstances surrounding his final years and the period between his disappearance and death remained unclear. There was no indication that he had attempted to contact his family after leaving West Virginia. The fact that he died in a car accident suggested that he was living a life separate from the family he left behind, although details about his activities, relationships, and locations during that period were limited. Morton's great-granddaughter expressed both relief and lingering sorrow upon discovering the true outcome. While the knowledge of his death provided closure, it also raised questions about why he never contacted his wife or children and what circumstances led him to New York, where he ultimately died. Family members noted that his disappearance had significant consequences. His wife struggled financially after his absence, and his children grew up without a father. Public reactions to the revelation of Morton's fate were mixed. Some observers commented on the role of chance, that a random comment under a YouTube video could lead to solving a nearly 70-year-old family mystery. Others highlighted how changes in record accessibility and the internet era allowed individuals to explore historical cases that were previously difficult to investigate. Morton's story illustrated a disappearance that straddled personal tragedy and historical circumstance. In the 1950s, missing persons investigations often lacked the coordinated databases and communication tools that exist today. Families of missing adults had limited resources to track someone who may have chosen to start a new life or change locations without informing relatives. The case of Wilford Morton remained a reminder of those challenges and the emotional toll on families. While no evidence suggested foul play or criminal involvement in Morton's disappearance, the lack of communication with his family created confusion and speculation for decades. The eventual identification of his death in an unrelated accident provided an answer but did not fully explain his motivations or actions during the period after he left home. Investigators, genealogists, and family members engaged in the case noted that historic missing persons cases can sometimes be resolved only through the persistence of relatives and the availability of public records. The Morton case did not involve modern forensic techniques or criminal investigation methods. Rather, it depended on archival research and serendipitous discovery prompted by community engagement. The conclusion of the Morton story did not involve law enforcement making an arrest or charging a suspect. Instead, it answered a long-standing question about the fate of a man who vanished from his family's life in the early 1950s. In this way, the Morton case resembled other cold cases where disappearance rather than homicide was the central mystery. Morton's family now has a documented timeline for his disappearance and death. He left his home in West Virginia in 1954, never returned to his wife and children, and ultimately died in a motor vehicle accident in New York in 1956. That sequence of events, confirmed through death records and archival research, provided the factual resolution to a case that had been a part of family history for more than half a century.